When Mike's mum, who lives in Germany, visited us earlier in the year, Mike asked her if she could show me a few recipes from his childhood. This was one of them. It was pretty special to cook with Mutti. She's a wonderful cook, and her recipe for goulash will be kept now and passed on to future generations. I start by prepping all my ingredients. I cut 500 grams of stewing steak into large pieces. I'm using blade steak here, but other alternatives would be chuck or gravy beef. Then I cut 500 grams of pork into large pieces. I'm using pork loin, but pork shoulder I think would even be better. Then I slice about 500 grams of red capsicums, peppers, into large pieces. I discard the white pith because sometimes this can be bitter. Next I peel about 500 grams of onions. I slice them in half and then into fairly thick slices. I was running short on brown onions and I made up the 500 grams with a small red onion. Now about 200 grams of mushrooms sliced quite thickly. I peel about 5 cloves of garlic. Mutti doesn't care much for garlic, so this is the only addition, the only thing I altered in the recipe. I then finally grate about 2 tablespoons of lemon rind. And now for the unique ingredient that I believe brings authenticity to the dish. That is dill pickled cucumbers. About 3 large ones, and I cut them into really small pieces. And that's the prep done. So I place a heavy pot on a medium to high heat and let the pot warm up for a few minutes. Then I add some olive oil just to cover the base. I wait until the oil is nice and hot and then I add the meat all at once. I let it sizzle for a few minutes before I give it a stir and then let it sizzle again. Then I repeat and repeat until the meat is all nicely brown, about 10 minutes or so. Once the meat is nice and brown, I add the onions and a heaped teaspoonful of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. I give them a good stir and continue to cook them for another 10 minutes, stirring frequently, until the onions have soaked up all the meat juice and are lovely and brown. Using a microplane, I grate the garlic cloves into the pot. I cook them just for a minute or so until I can smell the garlic. Next, 2 tablespoons of paprika powder and about 1.5 tablespoons of tomato paste. I always cook tomato paste for a few minutes before I add any other ingredients. I feel tomato paste can have an unusual raw flavour if it's not cooked out. I then add the lemon rind. Then I add the capsicums and mushrooms and I give that a little stir. Then enough water to almost cover the goulash. I give it a good stir, deglazing the pot with the water, combining any flavourful brown bits on the bottom of the pot. I bring it all to the boil, then reduce the heat to very low and put the lid on. I simmer it slowly for an hour. When the hour has passed, I taste a bit of the sauce and adjust the seasonings. I add a good teaspoon of sugar to balance the acidity from the tomato paste, and another teaspoon of salt. Next, the gherkins go into the pot. I give it a little stir. Then I put the lid back on and simmer it gently for another 30 minutes. Time again to taste for any adjustments. I add another teaspoon of sugar and a little more black pepper. At this stage, the meat should be tender enough that you can cut it with a spoon. If not, just simmer it covered for a bit longer. I'm serving it with crushed buttered boiled potatoes, sprinkled with a little parsley. It's funny, Mutti doesn't speak English and my German is very, very basic. But when it came to cooking, we understood each other perfectly and were able to bond over our love of food. Danke Mutti für das Rezept. Es war sehr lecker. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.